we can get started here. Thank you, everyone. I'm Anna Magnuson from the James Beard Foundation. I'm the programs coordinator. Welcome to Queer Food Advocacy. We have a great panel in store today. I'm just going to go over some information on how the webinar works, and we can get started. So this webinar is recorded and will be on our virtual education library. So you'll be able to watch this if you have to jump off or share this. This will be available on jamesbeard.org within the next week. We will field questions as time allows. So feel free as we go throughout the webinar to write your questions, and we'll try to leave at least 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer any questions. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll try to help as I can. I'm going to pass it now to Vanessa Parrish of QFF to introduce everyone.
Hey, Vanessa, I think you're on mute.
Of course I am. Hi guys, thank you so much for joining the James Beard Foundation, Queer Food Foundation collaboration. I did want to mention this is amazingly sponsored by Bento Box. So we're super grateful that they came on board to support queer food and food conversations. Radhika is our QFF board member that's going to be moderating the panel. We've got some amazing folks with insights and conversations that I really think will be a great treat for you folks. So I'm going to give it over to Radhika, and thank you guys so much for joining us.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much, like Vanessa said, for joining us. We're so excited for this conversation. I am a board member for QFF. I've also worked in the industry as a restaurant worker, coffee shops, currently in a wine shop. I'm based out of Brooklyn. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm just really excited to get this conversation going. So I'm going to pass it off to Preeti, who can introduce yourself. We can do name, pronouns, location, and the organization / work you do in your role.
All right. Hi, I'm Preeti. My pronouns are they, them. I am a chef, author, activist, and budding farmer. I am freelance chef. I work for a lot of different organizations. Currently, the biggest project I'm working on is with a vineyard up here in Sonoma County called Shifting the Lens. The vineyard's called J Winery. And the whole program is to highlight different BIPOC women chefs who are cooking non-European cuisines and giving them this wonderful platform and pairing it with beautiful wine. I'll keep it simple and not say too much right now.
Thanks, Preeti. Telly and Camille, would you like to go next?
Yeah, lovely. Yeah. My name is Telly Justice. My pronouns are she, her.
And my name is Camille Lindsley. My pronouns are she, her.
And we own a small kind of luxury focused restaurant in the East Village in New York City that kind of centers queer celebration and offsets the luxury aspect of the restaurant model by doing a sliding scale day. Every Sunday we offer food on a sliding scale to kind of mitigate the transactional quality of fine dining, make it more accessible.
Yeah. I'm the beverage director and
I'm the chef.
Yeah.
I guess that's important information.
Awesome. And then Aura, you want to round us out?
Hey y'all, I'm Aura and I'm a chef and an organizer. I'm a founding collective member of FIG, which is a collective of chefs, farmers, food sovereignty activists, and others working in the food system to change the food system. And we run a food security program in partnership with a web of inspiring, amazing partners, including Black Trans Liberation and Transgrediendo. And so I'll hopefully get to talk about that more. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based in Brooklyn.
Wonderful. So the theme of today's panel is caring for our communities through food. So let's kick off by first talking about what communities you all care through your food. What do those communities look like? What has led you into this work? And what is the impact that you're hoping to have?
Are you gonna pick one of us, or are you just gonna
Go for it, Preeti.
make us all just like fight for last? I guess I'm going first. I think for me, honestly, intersectionality is such a big part of this. I think, you know, having my restaurant in Oakland, definitely the queer BIPOC community was sort of the biggest thing, but I think that also recognizing where our restaurant was, there were other communities that were definitely more in need. So I would say in Oakland, it was really a combination of being a gathering space for queer folks, for BIPOC folks, definitely South Asian folks. And then I think moving up here to wine country, I'm on the board of an organization called Farm to Pantry, and we essentially glean produce off organic regenerative farms and get that to people in need. So I feel like in both cases, like being a queer chef and person that has a platform is important for the queer community. I think beyond that, it's important for me just to use my platform and influence actually to push organizations in both places. In Oakland, we were involved very heavily with an organization called Destiny Arts, which teaches arts and martial arts, but mostly dance and expression to young folks on a sliding scale. It really was like an amazing organization. A friend of mine was one of the founders, and it essentially gets kids off the street, right? And they're able to express themselves through dance and art and learn to be great humans. And I actually process a lot of issues in their lives, like homelessness and drug abuse and gang violence and domestic violence and things like that. And then up here with Farm to Pantry, you know, one of the things that I've done since I joined the board, which was very straight and very white and wealthy, as most nonprofit boards are, was to really help them refocus from, and it's a process, this concept of essentially it's a great organization. It's also a white savior organization, right? It's very much set up as this like, oh, all these people have all this stuff and all these people don't. And so we'll just make sure these folks get that. And to really keep forcing everyone to think about like, well, how do we change that why? Like, what can we do to change the why this exists, and do things that are a little bit more proactive, as opposed to just going, oh, this is how it is, so we'll use our like privileges to help people, but not really change anything. So that's kind of the way that's manifested so far has been things like creating partnerships with a lot of Latinx organizations. So there's like an integration, and it's not just like, oh, we're up here telling you what we think you need, but we're like working directly with communities that are food insecure up here. It looks like having community gardens where we work together to just grow food instead of just waiting for the wealthy to have excess. And then also supporting queer, BIPOC, and women farmers through this organization or this program called Growing the Table, where we pay basically women, BIPOC, queer farmers to grow produce, and then those food boxes go to food insecure folks. So it's sort of a better cycle as opposed to just waiting for the haves to have access. I really hope that the impact for me is like up here is just the fact that what I said, it's very straight and white in Sonoma County. It's a place I literally was like, I will never live there. And here I am. But I think that part of that is really just like the representation. It's being here and being part of the conversation, because if we are not here and we're not a part of the conversation, then these things don't change. They just continue, and all of those folks can pat themselves on the back and be rich and white and say like, oh, we did something nice for the poors and move on. But I think that bringing a different perspective to those conversations, I feel like in Oakland, so much of my work was like grassroots, working with organizations and working with the employees and the customers and like building this sort of like movement in Oakland around food and food justice. And now it's sort of like, oh, I've reached this different place and I'm in this different place. And a lot of these people actually listen to what I have to say because of the privilege that I've earned over the years. And so now I'm in those rooms and at those tables. So for me, I feel like the impact is just to keep pushing those well-meaning white people farther and farther and getting them out of their comfort zone to make a deeper impact.
Telly and Camille, I'm particularly curious about like what Preeti said and how that has looked for y'all in fine dining.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we represent a couple divergences from that arc in that one, we're new to the scene. We've only been open for a couple of weeks, honestly. And so we're in this fledgling state of trying to find ways to be most impactful right now through a restaurant space. And we're a restaurant. And so we have a certain model that we have to balance and make sustainable so that our staff is well cared for. And so that we have direct impact to our immediate neighborhood, which I think that especially fine dining, there's this long-standing relationship of almost being at odds with small neighborhoods rather than contributing to and being a positive community resource to the neighborhood. So in our case, we have this very personal relationship to the East Village, which is a diverse neighborhood. It's got a very unique and inspiring history that we love contributing to. It's very important and passionate to us. And so finding a way that we could, one, inhabit a space, like truly a footprint that has a relationship, a long-standing relationship to the fine dining sphere, which we are occupying the original Momofuku Co space, which I think most people have an understanding of what that is and what that means. And so we're not necessarily creating anything new or disruptive to the block or to the neighborhood by being a fine dining restaurant in that space, but we're pushing what I think the utility of a fine dining space can be in the accessibility of fine dining for a neighborhood by offering a sliding scale kind of outlet, a way to distribute food to people in a non-transactional way and load up as many community fridges in our neighborhood as possible to have that direct impact from a small space.
Yeah, and I think honestly, the smallness of the restaurant, I think, kind of poses an interesting, not even necessarily like a limitation, but just sort of a framework in which the sort of impact and outreach we can have in a fewer than 20 seat restaurant. I think that us creating a space that is intentionally luxurious and explicitly celebrating of queerness, I think does serve a purpose for, albeit probably a small community, and having a day a week where we offer food on a sliding scale is small, but it doesn't always feel diminutive.
To us, it's really like the driving furnace behind why we decided to do this at all and why HAGs exists. I think our sliding scale Sunday concept was kind of the inspiring factor that predetermines the cost and expense of the rest of the business model. How do we pay for and sustain paying for free food for a neighborhood in a way that people can kind of like set their watch by it? They know on Sunday at 5 p.m. you can get fed for free if you want. We're not a moving target. We can be relied upon to provide that meal, to be there for the community. And because we're just in our infancy, it feels hopeful that we can grow and offer even more by listening intently to that direct community in the East Village and specifically the queer community in New York City.
Amazing. Aura, do you have anything to add in terms of what your communities that you care for through food at FIG looks like?
Yeah, I mean, what I think probably we can all agree to and have this experience with is that food is a really unique medium in that it allows for simultaneously facilitating the internal, individual, and collective healing that we so especially queer communities need because of all the trauma and harm of the oppressive systems we live in, while simultaneously offering structural interventions, right? The opportunities to create community wealth and intervene and build alternatives to actual economic and agricultural systems, right? So for me, that's something that's been really powerful, is working with food, being able to simultaneously do internal community healing work and external structural material, like changing of conditions. And so that's kind of how FIG has found ourselves doing equitable food distribution. And I think that the thing that I say is FIG itself is not a queer collective, but we are participating in queering the food system. And I think one of the important things, to some extent, like Preeti, you referred to kind of the limitations of the nonprofit industrial complex and relying on philanthropy, we are trying to address, right? Because the thing is that access falls short because it doesn't necessarily equate to power, right? And so for us, we also know that there are organizations that are supporting advancing community wellness and wealth, but they're often practicing traditional nonprofit economic models themselves, which, as you were pointing out, rely on the current people in power and, raising philanthropic capital, which is often given by those who have it, actually based on what is advantageous to them, right? Tax breaks and plaques, I don't know, whatever, and control and maintaining control, right? So one of the things we're doing that FIG is involved in is not only queering the food system, but actually creating this much more collaborative grassroots model for doing food distribution work. And the way that we see it is our model is access done in ways that lead to and invest in the infrastructure needed for food security, and building the relationships, knowledge, and redistributing power and resources that will lead to food sovereignty, right? Actual ownership and governance and thriving cultural and economic communities. And so the way that FIG's food security program works is we are an ecosystem of partnerships. And so we're redistributing food and power and representation, and we're having, like you, Telly, had referred to, that deep listening. We're investing in the kinds of horizontal, long-term, authentic relationships that create the trust that you need in order for people to even feel like they can communicate real needs and real visions, and then doing that deep listening, rather than, as Preeti was describing, these very top-down decisions about what people need, or these ideas of who has and who hasn't, which is, so I think one thing that I want to share from just the experience over the past few weeks is, since Marsha P. Johnson's birthday, for which Black Trans Liberation wanted to have our weekly family meal that FIG produces with and for them and their extended family, they wanted to have it in Washington Square Park, and then have a celebration with music and dancing, and then march to the pier through the West Village. And since that was such a powerful experience, it's been now happening in the park every single Wednesday evening. And Transgrediendo had their own version of kind of taking up space in public and creating this positive, powerful stance where it's Black and brown, queer and trans folks who are feeding people and who are bringing this culture of celebration and protest all together. The way that I see it is this radical hospitality, right? And what it's doing is subverting the usual super oppressive power dynamics. So it's these, with Transgrediendo, they had a trans health street fest in the middle of Jackson Heights, which is no small thing. It's an act of incredible courage and flamboyance and community care. And we were giving out flowers and food there. And so I see that as the parallel to the Black Trans Liberation Kitchen weekly family meal in the park. And what we're seeing is that it's mutual aid being used as this incredible transformative tool for addressing and shifting homophobic and transphobic and white supremacist dynamics in our city and in these public spaces. And it's subverting that power structure. So I think that's just, for me, one of the exciting possibilities of this. And the other I'll say is that, I'm glad that there's an honesty here about the limitations of practicing radical hospitality in an industry that is set up to rely on exploitation and extraction, right, of labor, of natural resources. And so we're working with tight margins, but everyone here knows that that's no excuse, right? There is such a culture of complacency, I find, where then we kind of just go along with it and, say it's stressful and we can't figure it out. It's like, life is stressful. Do you know how stressful it is for most people out here on this planet? But I'll say that what we're finding is that because we're working in an ecosystem of partnerships where we have 2 farm partners and 2 kitchen partners and 2 community-based organization partners, and then 2 nonprofit partners, because we still need access to that, that kind of infrastructure, we're leveraging all of our resources and our strengths, and we're mitigating the costs and the limitations. And so we've actually been able to move mountains with an incredibly little amount of time and money, because we are leveraging the differences amongst us and pooling our resources, whether that means our delivery trucks or our kitchen staff or our admin capacities. We're pooling all those resources and being able to have a much bigger impact than any of us would be able to as the small, independently, locally owned businesses that we are.
That is super interesting. And I very much agree that life is stressful. That is a feeling I feel every day. I love
that being the deepest thing I say today.
I want to give a heads up to the participants that the chat is disabled, but as some of y'all have discovered, the Q&A is alive and well. So feel free to drop in your questions there and we'll be addressing those at the end. One thing, Aura, that you mentioned is this act of deep listening, building trust, understanding community needs. How have y'all gone about understanding the needs of your community? How has that approach changed since you've started? What have you learned? What mistakes have you learned? Like all of that kind of good stuff.
Who wants to go first?
I'm not going first.
Fair enough, Preeti. I just talked, but I have plenty of mistakes I can talk about.
Keep going. Yeah. We love it.
Do you want me to, Telly, or were you gearing up?
No, go for it. Yeah.
Go for it.
Could listen to you talk all day.
Oh, stop. Watch out. I'll come find you. So to start with the kind of positive framing of the question, right? Like how have we learned the needs of our community? And what does, I mean, and let's all be honest here, like the word community can be thrown around a lot to the point of it not meaning anything. So we actually had to really think about that. So one thing I'll say is that FIG in the first moments of the pandemic, the first 10 months of the pandemic, we found ourselves operating this emergency food relief program and delivering with this brigade of chefs and volunteer drivers and delivering door to door 4 out of 5 boroughs. And it wasn't sustainable. And it also was deeply needed, but we knew that we couldn't sustain it. And also we needed to figure out a way to do this survival work and mutual aid work, but in a way that was still strategically contributing to our mission, which is to create a sustainably equitable community-controlled food system. So we made the difficult decision to pause after 10 months. And when we relaunched deciding to go a mile deep and an inch wide rather than the other way around. And it was difficult, but we made the decision to relaunch with just one farm partner at the time and one community partner, Transgrediendo. And that meant that, especially also if you're looking at the philanthropy world and everything, we were dramatically reducing the numbers of meals served and pounds of food distributed, which are the incredibly reductive and not very helpful conventional metrics for food distribution and food access work. Since then, we have been so affirmed in that decision because it has allowed us to really tend to the details and deepen the relationships in ways that have allowed us to fix things and grow. So now, even just in our second season that we're about to finish, we are now, like I said, we've been able to expand. You know, things we learned were Transgrediendo is led by former sex workers, and the community is still, many folks work in on the streets in different ways and who are living in transient situations in and out of like the housing shelter system, detention centers. And so the feedback we were given was that even though they were really excited about the fresh vegetables we were delivering from Brooklyn Grange Rooftop Farm, that a bunch of the siblings couldn't access that. And so we responded to that need, and also the concern around how awkward and disempowering it can be for folks to like line up to receive food or to try to heat food up in a shelter. So we now have individually packaged prepared meals and raised money for a microwave and a refrigerator that now live at Transgrediendo's space, so that folks can come and reheat those meals for themselves when it works for them, and also eat it and enjoy it in a community space. Another piece was when Brooklyn Grange didn't have a delivery route to Queens, and we had to have this kind of a difficult moment saying, FIG, our collective, is really, really limited capacity. We're a grassroots collective of folks who most of the time have been doing this work completely uncompensated and just trying to build in the resources into our other work, you know? And we had to have candid conversations about what does partnership really mean. And they, in the end, took it really seriously and stepped up and figured out a way to hire and pay a new driver and create a new delivery route to Queens, so they could start taking on that responsibility, which was really exciting once we got over that initial struggle of like, but wait, we can't do it. And the last thing I'll offer as an example of kind of the listening and the learning, because I think it's very relevant, is when we started structuring the partnership with Black Trans Liberation. we decided to launch, as some, maybe all of you know, the Black Trans Liberation Kitchen fundraising campaign for June and July. And during those initial planning conversations, we had to have what on the maybe surface seemed like boring administrative conversations, but were actually like powerfully important and radical, where it was like, where are the funds gonna live? And through who's, you know, is Queen Jean or Black Trans Liberation gonna host a GoFundMe? But is that putting too much labor and tapping her or their network, social network too much? So we had these conversations in which then they said they wanted the funds to go through FIG's fiscal sponsor as a way that we could then, you know, mobilize that institutional resource, but then came up with an agreement of what percentage of the raise ultimately would live where. And so after a lot of dialogue and the Black Trans Liberation organizers and Queen Jean and a sibling Jade sharing really honestly that they'd been burned before collaborating with a nonprofit, and then that nonprofit really not following through on their commitments to redistribute the funds. And so they came in really honestly saying sovereignty over the funds is really important to us. And then we were able to say, yes, and we want you to really know how grassroots and scrappy of a collective we are, because we're not some big nonprofit. And so in order to do this work together, it truly is a horizontal partnership. Like, we actually aren't those kinds of HAGs. We're people who know that we have skills and resources as food industry workers that we want to mobilize for care, you know, community care systems and community-owned food infrastructure. And so we had these incredible conversations and ended up landing on an agreement that 60% of the funds would, that we raised together through that campaign, would go to Black Trans Liberation. 10%, some percentage goes to our fiscal sponsor, and then math is hard, but there was 15, 20%, 30% would go to Transgrediendo, acknowledging that it was their work with us during the season before that had created the, you know, kind of systems that we were using to build with Black Trans Liberation. And then like 10%, I know I just gave you weird math, would stay with FIG under our direct control to use for the costs of the meals that we deliver. So I wanted to share that as an example of how we were correcting for and trying to partner around some of the broken trust and the issues around the, you know, the ways we work together have perpetuated the harm of white supremacy. So that is some of what I can offer.
Yeah, I really love this question of trying to sort of assess what the community need is, because like Aura was saying, community can be such a nebulous word that it ceases to lose, to have really any meaning. Mm-hmm. And for us, you know, as we have gone through in the last 2 years being a pop-up and then working towards building a brick and mortar, opening, and then unfortunately most recently needing to close for some repairs, we've had to sort of adapt through these different phases of the life of HAGs. So I think that's something that we really wanted to do, especially as we were building the brick and mortar, was to use our platform to be pretty like direct and just straight up asking what would a cool and accessible and exciting bathroom look like? Mm-hmm. And thinking too about what kinds of questions were being asked and what kinds of questions weren't being asked. Mm-hmm. So looking to sort of think about like a bathroom is a very sort of symbolic place. It's private. It is very politically charged.
It's utilitarian.
It's utilitarian. And so we sort of had this idea and this dream of having it be like an anarchist powder room where, you know, there are flossers and breath mints, and also there are fentanyl test strips and condoms and pads and tampons. Telly had a really great idea of having a funhouse mirror. So we definitely, you know, like tried to, and I, you know, it was so interesting to hear what people had to say. Everyone has lots of opinions about bathrooms.
And we kind of entertained that democratization through the building of the business model with even mundane things like fonts. What are the most accessible fonts and font colors for a menu? How do you like a chair to feel? What bodies feel discluded from a fine dining space, and how do we include them through the structure, through the design, through the way we invite people? And just being patient and actively listening to the answers, even when they were very challenging, and then reflecting on that through the building of the model and the physical space, so that the physical space itself called to a community, whether it was a community that we chose or a community that chose us, was really part of the process. But that was the building. And we've found that community orientation changes circumstantially in a lot of cases. So once we became material and we were opening and we were offering a service, the community that was most impacted was the East Village. And so we started orienting our work towards, how do we feed this block, this neighborhood, Lower Manhattan, the people that are coming and showing up, these seniors that are waiting in line with these NYU students for handmade sausages on a Sunday at 6 o'clock. What do they want? And so we found that as our online presence and our online platform kind of escalated, and we were getting these this direct input from people from California all of a sudden, or Wisconsin all of a sudden, while those voices are really important to us, the most important voice is the voice of the individual directly impacted by HAGs, and not giving more weight to that voice feels like it is disparate to the community need. So we've shifted focus over the like developing and ideation phase to now existing and providing a service. And now that we're experiencing a need to close for repairs, our community of direct impact shrinks to our staff. And how do we concentrate on making sure that our staff isn't negatively impacted, that they're paid through this closure, that they're comfortable, and that they're supported through, you know, our resources in whatever direction they want to go right now, while we're figuring out, you know, ancient East Village plumbing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think it's so important to think about community sometimes in terms of like a bullseye of like the people who are the most sort of like close and proximal to you, and the people who are around on a like day-to-day basis. Like, yeah, for us, our staff, our next door neighbor who we get to like complain about the landlord to a whole lot, and you know, the coffee shop that keeps us caffeinated. You know, we really wanted to sort of a change, like as we have sort of like shape shifted over the last 2 years, the different communities have changed along with it as well. And needs are constantly changing. I think that it's been interesting to see, you know, 2021, the need for the food that we did in pop-ups. We did a lot of pop-ups that were completely free. And so we felt that that was just like a super important thing to bring into our day-to-day and our week as we were open in a physical space.
Yeah.
Awesome. I would say, you know, I talked a little earlier about the sort of tactical things, both in helping, you know, really the most vulnerable in one's community, whether that's in Oakland or here in wine country. But to Aura's point, community, and to Telly and Camille sort of expanding on that and building on it, community is a lot of different things. So for me, one thing that's been interesting in the last few years since closing my restaurant is how that community has shifted when I'm not in that tactical space where I own the kitchen, I have the staff and the walk-in and the food, but into more mentorship and connecting sort of role. So that's been something that's been super rewarding for me, and I hope impactful for many of the people that mostly queer or BIPOC women chefs and owners. A few things I think feel very proud of are, like, for example, the Juhu space is now Fob Kitchen, so it's still a queer BIPOC space. And Janice Dulce, who's the chef there, is Filipino. They make great food. It's still this very vibrant queer space. They also opened the space up, as we did, for younger queers and people of color to do pop-ups. Right before the pandemic, like literally right before the pandemic, February 2020, I had organized this gathering, and basically the whole concept was, I know all of you and you all don't know each other, and this doesn't make sense, and you should know each other. It was essentially a call to sort of like the opposite of the old boys club. And about 30, mostly women, except for Vinny Eng, because I was like, it's gonna be all women, and he was like, I'm like, okay, women, LGBTQ. So Vinny was there. For those of you who know Vinny, you've got warm feelings going on right now. And the concept, even though that was our one and only meeting, was actually quite pivotal that it was February. Although Reem was like March 16th, she was like, we should still meet, it's important. And I was like, I don't think it's safe. But I think it was actually a wonderful thing, because all of those folks did get to meet each other right before things got really, really real for everyone. And so if anything, it was a great opportunity right before everything hit the fan to know each other, to share those numbers, and to know that now you have this community. I think that that's been something that has been really important to me, is creating that community within the women and queer chef communities to support all of these chefs. I've been since then in a role of just like a mentor, which feels amazing. And I want to be there. It really started with just like having drinks with friends and literally saying the same thing over and over again. Like, you're not making this up. This is not like, I've gone through similar things. Boomer women of color chefs I know have gone through similar things. And, basically, it's okay. And this is how I can help, or this is who I can hook you up with. Since moving up here during the pandemic, the first thing I did, because I was consulting and all of the things I was doing went away, I started volunteering on a queer farm. And that was a really rewarding experience for me as a chef, because I've always wanted to like connect more with the farming culture. Since then, a couple other farms like Solar Punk Farms, also a queer farm in Guerneville, Earthseed Farm, which is a Afro-Indigenous collective, amazing 14-acre orchard. If you ever get the opportunity to come to Sonoma County, you should definitely go there. And so even up here, I think the role has become not just in Oakland, it was like bringing all these people together. Here, I feel like it's like I'm still looking for my own community. And through that process, because of the sort of, I don't know, lightning rod I seem to end up being, semi-famous in a small town, I end up not only finding my own community, but bringing other people together. So whether it's, I saw Darwin was actually in the Q&A, who is a queer budding winemaker who has an organization called Co-Fermented in Napa. There's been other winemakers, queer woman of color winemaker Maria, and just kind of bringing all those folks together, women of color chefs, a good friend of mine, Leah Skirto, who has the best pizza in Sonoma County, some would say the Bay Area. And she is a dough master and a fabulous queer pizza maker. To me, it's about building those connections and networks and using my role where I get to meet, you know, Leah, or I get to meet this winemaker, but they, you know, being a chef and being a farmer and a winemaker, those are all such isolating roles. Like you're doing all this stuff and you're just like, you know, and there's folks that are, you know, younger than me that are just getting started. They don't know everyone. And so being able to see somebody doing something awesome and be like, wow, this is so great. Like, I want to introduce you to these folks and these folks, and sort of building that community that way, and then creating that connection, because I do think it's so important. This is an agricultural hub of, you know, the larger Northern California and beyond, like between chefs and specifically women of color chefs in San Francisco and Oakland, and up here, and farmers up here. Like, all of those connections are so important. So I feel like for me, the way I focused on the change part of your question, has gone from being in that tactical grassroots place to really sort of being like, oh, you should know this person, and this person should know that person, and how can we all like work together? The dream would be sometime down the line that, you know, I'm able to have some sort of venue or venues where more of these folks can all sort of come together and be, you know, and be seen and featured and come together.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Preeti. So I'm going to now jump into audience questions. One question that we have is that we've been talking a lot about the best side of queer care for communities, which is through intentionality. But what foods are queer, and what does a queer approach mean to plated dishes? I can start by answering that, which is, I wouldn't say that food itself is either gay or straight, though I do definitely believe that Jell-O is very gay. That may be the only exception. But the approach is basically what food is, right? Like, food cannot be divorced from its approach and from the people who are making it, the people who are providing it, the people who are bringing it to us, and the delivery. And so though the end product itself may not be able to be clearly defined as queer or not, everything along the way can be. And a question that I have, this leads into, I guess this is like a fake way of me pulling in an audience question, but a question I have is, what does it mean? Yeah, strategic. Thank you, Aura. What does it mean to queer the food system, and what are futures that we want to see for queerness and food and care for our communities, for the nebulous communities that we serve?
Well, I feel like I want to appreciate you offering that the queerness is in the process, in the culture, in, you know, the methods, the space we create, the connections, which I think everyone here we've kind of spoken to some extent, and it looks really different in all three of our context, you know, like the three different contexts we're all working in. And I think it's really important for us to kind of make that intervention, because that very media, like soundbitey, kind of thinned or diluted identity politics does not serve, I think, any of our visions for queer and trans liberation, for racial and economic justice, you know, for a future of food that involves surviving and thriving. You know, I think because also, like, individuals who possess a certain historically marginalized identity getting platformed or representation or an opportunity does not automatically lead to collective liberation or empowerment. It doesn't even, as I'm sure we all here can speak to, even lead to that individual from a marginalized identity having any power or ownership in the particular context, right? You can be on the cover of a magazine and still be struggling to pay your bills. You're not owning that outlet, right? So just to say, I think that's one of the reasons why it's really important for us to, like, straight up, I think, reject that whole, like, what's queer food and, you know, all of that. And for me, it's not enough for a chef to be queer, for a project to be exciting to me, or be considered like transformative or, you know, impactful as a queer project. So I'll just add to that real quick that in terms of the, you know, the future of or like how we define and how we envision community care and how food plays a role. For me, I think why radical hospitality has kind of gelled for me as the more expansive conceptual framework or container for my work. And I dare say maybe y'all's, I see you all as radical hospitality practitioners in different ways. And I also see Queen Jean who as a radical hospitality practitioner, and Liam from Transgrediendo. Why is because I think it's juicier than just like food access or even food justice, right? And it also speaks to the importance of creating invitational and delicious movements and work for social change. And because for me, I'm interested in the care, and we deeply need healing. I am constantly every day impacted by and witnessing the trauma and woundedness that queer and trans folks in particular are sustaining. And we need food to literally better process that trauma and wounds. But we also need to own the means of production. And we also need actual resources and structures. We need to be generating community health and community wealth. And I want us to equally address the need for deep spiritual, sexual, interpersonal, cultural healing and transformation on individual and collective levels. We cannot wait to heal till we overturn and overthrow these oppressive systems. And at the same time, I want us to be really, really serious about wealth, community benefit, ownership, distributed power. And those are equally important and have to go hand in hand. And we as food folks are uniquely capable of facilitating that. We are at the nexus of these things. And how wonderful that we get to be advocates for like hedonism and pleasure, because good food is connected to like truly good food that is good for you and community and planet, economically, physically, culturally, is connected to like good decisions around resource use, labor, soil, neighborhoods, everything.
I have to say one thing, Aura. I believe that there is such a thing as queer food.
Well, so important and queer for us to have different.
Yeah, I feel like to me, and it doesn't. It's not necessarily about the person, and obviously the person could be queer and be making not queer food because they still have a colonized mind about like what they're supposed to be doing and what they're trying to create. But I think on the other side of that colonized mind is, to me, queer food is like there's no rules. I feel like for me, it's like I stopped being whoever my parents hoped I was going to be a long ass time ago. And so I don't feel any, I don't have to do, especially coming from, as a chef who cooks food of their own culture, and a culture that until somewhat recently, and I'd like to hope that I, had some part in that change, it was very prescribed, right? It was like, this is Indian cuisine, and you're not allowed to do all these other things. And for me, I feel like anytime, I'm not wed to some like, oh, it has to be like this, or you have to use that spice, or you have to, do this in that way, or you can't do, basically the can'ts, right? There's no can'ts. It's like, what if is just like what if? And to me, I think that when you are coming from a perspective where so many of the rules of general society are like out the door, it opens up your mind to actually see things differently. I do believe that there are certain things that I've created where someone's like, how did you come up with that idea? And I'm like, I don't know. It's just kind of how my mind works, And I think that some of that really is part of like what queer food is. That throwing the rules out and just like creating something that is like uniquely your expression and it's your true authentic expression, and you're not holding back because of what certain people think you should do or what things should look like or how they should be. I think also I wanted to go second because of the other thing you talked about, radical hospitality, and before Telly and Camille, because I feel like that piece, there's the sort of beautiful political side of it that you just talked about and sort of organizing. I think there's also this thing about like making people feel welcome, right? And as cliche as that sounds like what the two of you just said about the process that you went through in thinking about your bathroom and how you want to design that, and how important that is. Like our second restaurant, I was super busy because I had a first restaurant, and my wife was like buying all of this art on Etsy for the space, and we wanted it to have this slightly more like political sort of bent to it, as opposed to Juhu, which was just sort of my street food thing. And it became political because I can't help it. But she had bought this painting from Etsy, and it said, "Your gender is beautiful." And it went on the bathroom door, and like she opened it, and I couldn't help it because she didn't tell me or anything. I was just like, "Oh, there's another thing you got? Like, what's this one say? Power to the people." And I was just like, "Oh my God." And I started crying because it just meant so much as a person, specifically like just recently coming from everyone's favorite place as a gender non-conforming person, the airport. What is it about airport bathrooms that brings out the most horribleness in all humans? But I think it's about that. Like radical hospitality is also about, like, to your point about like what you are all doing is like fine dining. And it's important for there to be those beautiful spaces, those luxurious spaces that we can take up and be seen fully. I think about like, I have said this to many white male chefs, that you don't get what it's like to be a person like me. You walk into a place, now you're a famous chef, and you're in the industry, so everybody treats you really well. But I have the fun experience of being treated like absolute dada doo-doo. Like I don't fucking matter. And then all of a sudden, oh, they know who I am, and that experience gets elevated in this way. And I'm like, I need you guys to think about how everybody gets treated this way. Like I shouldn't get treated this way just because I'm now a famous chef. Like everyone who looks like me, all of my friends who are school teachers and carpenters should also get treated just as well. And that was something I actually used to really drill home to my front of the house staff at the restaurant, was how, like, because as marginalized people, we are so often treated so poorly in especially fine dining spaces, that they needed to go out of their way to make sure that anyone who is a marginalized person or marginalized identity knows how deeply welcome and cared for that they will be in our space, because that is just, it's so important in this way. Like if you're that white guy I'm talking about, chef, who, the host is busy for 5 minutes, like he's like, whatever, they're busy. But like for us, that's like brings up all this trauma of all of these environments in which people ignore us. We are, invisible, we are forgotten, whatever, all the things we know, we're put at that table, this thing isn't available, all the things that we need to go out of our way to like embrace and make sure that everyone, this cliched statement, feels like super, super welcome, especially for our, queer family and community.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, that was so beautiful and touching. Both of what y'all shared. And I find that HAGs and what we attempt to do and what we're aspiring to do is recognizing and respectful to both places, both a political practice and how do we incorporate that in radical hospitality into a physical brick and mortar space that resembles a restaurant, And how do we also honor the queerness and creative spirit of creating something that is reflective of ourselves, that encourages other people to be reflective of themselves, that creates space for more expression and more queer creativity, which I think we are an incredibly, incredibly creative community that deserves so much recognition for our creative practices.
And resourceful to boot.
And incredibly resourceful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, we come from a restaurant background. I've only ever worked in restaurants. It's the only work that I know. And so that skeleton is always going to be like behind the flesh of what we build. I think that in terms of the future of food and its relationship to community, I think all restaurant owners in 2022 are just like not reflective of the current state of affairs if they aren't scared that restaurants won't exist 10 years from now in a meaningful way that is accessible to most people that can eat. And you know, we all have to eat. And so I wonder, as a restaurant that just opened, with 16 years of restaurant experience as a trans person behind me, what will HAGs look like 10 years from now? And I don't believe that it'll be as like visibly demonstrative of a restaurant, but there's a long process of shape shifting towards what will make most sense for the most people going forward. In our time now, I think our most pressing work that we spend the most time talking about is how do we chip away at what is still such a institutionally broken, culturally broken system of fine dining. How do we, as the people that we are, with the experiences that we hold as workers, how do we chip away at that? How do we shape it towards something that 10 years from now doesn't resemble its current state? And add our voices to push that conversation along so that everybody can afford to eat fine dining food 10 years from now.
And to provide mentorship for a younger generation that's coming behind us too. You know, I think that it is, and I see like the significance and the impact for folks to be able to work in a space where they're not, well, first of all, you know, one, restaurants, you know, it's like everything is so didactic, you know, there are these very hierarchical systems in place. And so like thinking about like ways to sort of subvert that, or ways to sort of poke holes in those more didactic structures and making them feel more queer in their approach to relations is vital to both like the staff, the way you mentor folks, the way that you, just like Preeti, what you were saying, like how you interact with guests, it's huge. And if you're not thinking about like how to queer the relationship and the relations within how you serve people
in a physical space, which is something that we're limited by, a very small physical space. We talk about physical space a lot. We talk about the queering of design. We talk about the accessibility of design. These are unique talking points to restaurants, especially as in Manhattan specifically, which has such a historic relationship to restaurants and restaurant culture, has, you know, built some of the most toxic systems in restaurant culture to ever be experienced. But also in the culture of real estate development and landlord ownership, the spaces get smaller and smaller and smaller for more and more money, which inherently decides who gets access to these spaces, and then the communities that those people with those privileges to own spaces entertain. How do we start chipping away at that? Because it's only getting worse. We've only seen it get worse. How do we get our foot into a small space and talk about queering, you know, the physicality of restaurants and the cultural element of restaurants, so that 10 years from now, we're in a better place, not a worse place?
Thank you all for that. That is incredible. This whole panel has been really, really wonderful. And I just know that I'm really excited to continue to work with people like y'all. And I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for us. I'm rooting for all of us. I'm going to pass it now to Vanessa and Anna, who will close us out.
Yes, I could listen to you guys talk forever. This is such an amazing conversation. Thank you guys so much for being a part of it. Thank you to the attendees for hanging out with us. A few announcements. Thank you to Bento Box again for supporting this panels. We're hoping to have this in perpetuity for into 2023. So fingers crossed. A quick announcement for QFF is we're working on a queer food directory to kind of support all the projects and folks that were mentioned in this panel. So if you want to complete our survey to kind of give us some insight of how we can best support our community, that directory should be coming out within the end of the year. We also have some new give back projects and things like that coming up, one with HAGs. So we're really excited about that. But of course, however we can support the community, however, we always take volunteers. We're trying to expand ourselves to more cities and more support. So thank you guys so much. Come find us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.